Hello and welcome to another episode of Africa Update on Trust Television. I'm your host, Chiamaka Mwafo. This week on Africa Update, we'll be looking at Kenya, what's actually happening in the East African country, and of course, other stories on our great continent of Africa. Now, Kenya. Kenyan President William Ruto on Thursday dismissed most of his cabinet, firing everyone except his foreign affairs ministers. The dismissal follows weeks of protests that were triggered by proposed tax hikes and transformed into calls for Ruto to remove allegedly corrupt and non-performing ministers. Now, speaking at the State House on Thursday, Ruto said the country's recent political and economic situation led him to fire his ministers. Africa News has more for us.
Kenya's President William Samoei Ruto fired almost an entire cabinet on Thursday following the recent protest by the youths in various towns in the country. The East African nation has seen 3 weeks of unrest in which protesters stormed into parliament on June 25 after a finance bill that increased taxes was passed. More than 30 people died in the protest, which have morphed into calls for the president to resign. In a televised address, the president also dismissed the attorney general and said ministries will be run by their permanent secretaries. Ruto promised to form a new government that will be lean and efficient following weeks of protest over high taxes and poor governance. Ruto said he made the move after listening to the people, especially the youths, and that he will form a broad-based government after consultation.
That's what's happening in Kenya at the moment, and more news on that. But joining me to discuss further the Kenya situation is Philip Pandey, one of our very, very wonderful regulars here from Kenya, and he's a youth inclusion advisor. Philip, good evening.
A very good evening to you, Shamaka, from Nairobi, the capital of Kenya, and indeed the epicenter of the youth revolution.
All right, thank you so much. Last time we spoke, you were, I think, at Mombasa, and today you're in Nairobi. Okay.
Yes, I was at the coastal city of Mombasa.
Okay. So now, why the sack, really? You know, why did he sack? I remember when we were speaking about the program earlier, you said he actually fired all of his cabinets. So what's the position, all or most of his cabinets?
Chamaka, indeed, it's, I would say, 99% of the cabinet, because it's only the minister of in charge of foreign affairs and holding again the portfolio of the prime cabinet position that has been, largely said to be illegal because it has no foundation in the Kenya's constitution. But I would say it's 1 out of 22 that is left in cabinet today. So fundamentally, the president has fired his entire cabinet, including the attorney general.
Oh, wow! So now I know this is some sort of a reactionary approach to the protest, but how does this in any way help the people of Kenya and their agitations?
Indeed, the fundamental question has been, was it necessary to fire the entire cabinet? And the answer is yes, that was one of the demands by the young people. Of course, the hashtag is Ruto must go, which means the president must go. The initial bit was the collapse of the finance bill. We've seen now the firing of the cabinet, and people have insisted that there is no need of reshuffling or bringing in the old faces back, but an entirely new government. Besides the cabinet, we've seen the exit of the Inspector General of Police and so many other things happening at the backdrop. I'll tell you, Shamaka, that perhaps this is just the beginning of what the youth term as, draining the swamp in Kenya, and draining the swamp to mean that all old guards and particularly public servants, including ministers now, including PSs, including high-ranking government officials that have not lived the bill, that have not performed and discharged their duties as expected by the public, should be shown the door, and a new government probably should be seen to come in place. You are aware that this is probably happening at the height of a proposed dialogue that should kick off this Monday, dubbed by the president himself as the National Multi-Sectoral Forum, that proposes to have 150 people, among them 50 young people, to discuss the process of reconstructing Kenya at the height of this conflict. But there are many other demands by young people. At the bottom of all is accountable governance, and a government that listens to the people and not to itself.
All right. Now, I went ahead without asking you what your take is on this sack. Actually, your youth inclusion advice, and I know that you're in the political arena of Kenya. So what's your take on the cabinet's sack? Do you think it's in the right direction,
Chamaka, indeed, it is a step towards the right direction, because it has been one of the demands. My own position is there is really a need to rebuild this country, especially after the uproar by young people. And one such step should be reconstruction of cabinet, rebuilding government to show the face of Kenya, a more inclusive government in the essence of youth inclusion, gender parity, and taking cognizant of the place of persons with disability. So my take is that the president did the right thing by sacking the entire cabinet. Of course, we know that there could be one or two casualties, people that probably would have gotten a second chance to really continue discharging their mandate. But as it is now, as it were, when you're playing for a team that literally is looking to be failing, sometimes the overhaul process, covers everybody, the good and the bad. So I'm confident that this should be one of the steps towards rebuilding, reconstructing Kenya in the eyes of the youth, in the eyes of the overall community here and the general public. And the next step should be that level of principal secretaries that are probably still taking charge because of the absence of the ministers.
All right. Now, so when he was speaking, he said he did this to now have a leaner, more effective government. Now, you're in Kenya. What does that exactly mean? Is it that some of these cabinet members were not necessarily needed, or was just just a thing of filling up positions or something? What does he mean by now having a leaner and more effective government?
Chamaka, perhaps a little background would be important. Initially, before the 2010 constitution, which Kenya is using today, we had the old constitution, which the former presidents, the late President Kibaki and Moi, exploited to basically reward political loyalists in cabinet. And the last cabinet of President Kibaki, I think, had about 44 ministers and their assistants. When the new constitution came into force, it is a provision within that constitution that the cabinet shall be composed of 14, a minimum of 14 cabinet secretaries and a maximum of 22. So both the former President Uhuru Kenyatta and now President Ruto have worked with the maximum, which is 22. A leaner government perhaps would mean that he is discharging most of his advisors other than the cabinet, discharging more of the principal secretaries, because we have about 54 of them. But I don't foresee a situation, especially now, where the president would have less than 22 cabinet ministers. And this is tied to the fact that he's talking about a broad-based government. A broad-based government that is efficient would basically mean that he is reaching out to the opposition, and we've seen him on Thursday this week, I believe. He had a meeting with the official opposition leader here, the Right Honorable Raila Amolo Odinga, and consulting with the opposition parties. So what we are likely to see in the coming days is a broad-based government, as he says. We've had, of course, in the past, the government of national unity. We've had recently, under President Uhuru's reign, the handshake government. And so the broad-based government would really take care of other parties in the opposition. There's a mere coalition, and we've seen the Right Honorable Prime Minister working closely with the president in the last few days. This is the talk of town now, and the expectation is the cabinet might not be smaller than it was previously with 22 ministers, but we will see more of draft measures taken, perhaps on the number of principal secretaries, the number of advisors to the president. And perhaps for me, I doubt that there would be really few people, but it would be taking care of many other interests to ensure that he regains stability and that he would probably have a second chance to fight, not just to conclude his term, but also an attempt to lay ground for the next.
All right, let's go a bit back to the protest. Now, this protest has similarly been tagged, Ruto must go. Must Ruto actually go? That's the most important question. Must he go? If he's able to fix these things, can he stay? You're the youth inclusion advisor, so what are the youths in Kenya saying?
Well, Chiamaka, there was a second chance for the president, and he had a second chance to make many things right, including firing non-performing government officials, including throwing out the finance bill as it were, including rationalizing the budget to have austerity measures, not to overburden the public, including improving service delivery to the people. But from a very personal point of view, yesterday, the events of yesterday and today revealing several bodies dumped in a quarry within the vicinities of Nairobi, takes this to a different location altogether. It gives it a different, bearing. I would have forgiven the president for not performing for the last 2 years. I would have forgiven the cabinet for not doing the right thing as Kenyans expected. But I'm really disappointed as a young person in Kenya and as a youth inclusion advisor that a majority of these bodies belong to young people that were abducted, that have been missing for weeks and for days now, and were found dead and dumped. It is under these circumstances that we see it difficult to forgive the president.
Wow. Now, you already preempted the next course of our conversation, which was the dead bodies and the resignation of the Inspector General Kome. And first of all, the souls of the departed rest in peace and accept our condolences of the dead people. But this brings about the issue of police brutality. This brings about the issue of rights to protest. So we're seeing stories that say that people are being picked off, taken, demonstrators. How true is that information? And those bodies that are being found, were they at the protest ground? Can we say for sure that these people were on the protest ground protesting and they were picked off, taken off, and then maybe, I don't know, murdered or something, and then their bodies dumped?
Well, Shamaka, we may not say in conclusion that these were protesters within the capital, Nairobi, but we see a very close connection between this and many things that Kenyans have said, especially on police raining on people in the residential areas. One of them, a well-known residential area called Githurai, where on the June 25th, where we had the Parliament of Kenya, overrun by young people, there was also what has been dubbed the Githurai massacre, in which it's believed that a number of people lost their lives to police brutality and killings by the government of the day. People that have not been accounted today. the president relied on an investigative, presentation by one of the international media houses that really did not tie any results to what the public had condemned. But then looking at the revelation yesterday, looking at the number of bodies picked here, and looking at the number of disappearances that we've had, then you can closely say that this is happening at the backdrop of the demonstrations. And not just that particular, query. In the last few days, and indeed yesterday, there was a demonstration by the Jomo Kenyatta University of Science, Agriculture and Technology students against the death of one of their own who was found in yet another quarry very close to the institution. This is one of the protesters. This is one of the digital activists that had gone missing. Not very far from, the university, there was yet another girl, female, found dead, stuffed with clothes and the Kenyan flag and paper on protest in the mouth. And this clearly tells you that this is fundamentally one of the activists, one of the young people that were protesting. So we will wait to see what the investigations and what the postmortem reports would say about these particular persons that have been, bodies that have been found between yesterday and today. The extraction is still ongoing. But today, an incident that has worried the public is the fact that the police refused to open the gunny bags that were carrying these bodies, as opposed to what was happening yesterday. So it's really a scary situation, and we are not really confident that this is going to end nicely.
All right, Mr. Philip, just before we go, this new cabinet, what is Ruto looking out, or what rather should he be looking out in the constitution of this new cabinet that would make the people happy, I believe?
Well, Chamaka, if a new cabinet is formed in Kenya today, one thing that it must give a priority is youth inclusion. Young people in Kenya make 75% of our population, people aged below 35 years. But in the current or the existing cabinet, there was none under the age of 35. That tells you that exclusion is really one of the things that young people are shouting against. So priority must be given to the young people to form at least 50% of the cabinet. The second thing is it must represent the face of Kenya. One thing that has been fought, consistently, not just in this revolution, but even in other attempts prior to this, was, having the face of Kenya and equal sharing of the national cake, which is not the case now. If you take a chance to look at the distribution of even the principal secretary positions, it would not be ethnically correct to say that that is a representation of the country. So while the focus today is not the ethnicity, the focus is the face of Kenya, and that must come to fore. The other thing is competence. We saw, for example, a majority of the outgoing cabinet being, rewardees of the political process and people of the political party that the president ran on, the United Democratic Party. It is not. It is not right that people that were not qualified for cabinet positions found themselves in cabinet. And that has been one of the greatest undoing of the president. So competence would be such a critical thing to look at. The other thing is integrity. We had people in cabinet, for example, that had several questions on their integrity, and that, came open at the level of, the interviews and vetting by Parliament. But this was overlooked because the president's party had a majority. And, it was an outright misuse of the numbers in Parliament, so that the parliamentary majority that backed the presidential appointees then gave him really what has been a letdown to him. So integrity, accountability, good governance, people with ethics, people with qualifications, people that represent the face of Kenya, and the young people must be part of that new cabinet now or in future.
All right, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Mr. Philip Pandey from Kenya, currently at Nairobi, Kenya, the capital. He's just been talking to us about what's happening, the situation in Kenya. Thank you so much, Mr. Philip. It's good to have you on Africa Update today.
I appreciate it, Shamaka. Thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure talking to you on matters Kenya, East Africa, and the continent at large.
And after the break, we'll be looking into other stories on our great continent. Please do stay with us. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Thanks for staying with us on Africa Update here on Trust Television, and we give you updates on what's happening on our great motherland, the African continent. Now let's go to Mali, where the military junta on Wednesday said it would allow political parties and associations to resume their activities. The announcement by the Council of Ministers came 3 months after activities were suspended purportedly to safeguard public order. Africa News tells us more.
Mali's military junta says it will allow political parties and associations to resume their activities. The announcement on Wednesday came 3 months after they were suspended, purportedly to safeguard public order. At the time, political parties were protesting against the military government's decision to stay in power beyond a March 2024 deadline for returning to civilian rule. A national dialogue for peace, which started days later, recommended the military remain in power for 2 to 5 additional years, and that the current head of the junta be allowed to run for any future presidential election. In the past 2 years, the junta has broken its long-standing alliance with France and its European partners to turn militarily and politically towards Russia, and it kicked out the UN peacekeeping mission MINUSMA, deployed to help restore stability in the north.
Now, a well-earned rest for these 2 lions, who researchers believe swam the longest distance ever recorded for the species. A feat made even more remarkable by the fact that one of the lions, Jacob, has only 3 legs, after losing one to a poacher's snare. Take a look.
The Lion King in Africa is one that has been told for several years. In Uganda, the story of a 3-legged lion and his brother has caught the attention of researchers by swimming across an African river filled with hippos and Nile crocodiles. The pair swam 1.5 kilometers across Kazinga Channel in Uganda.
So from a behavioral standpoint, it's fascinating to see them, cross such a large water body and over such a long distance. But I think it's also a testament to a much larger problem, and it's a symptom of a much larger problem, and that's animals are having to take much bigger risks in a human-dominated world.
Using a drone, researchers filmed Jacob and his brother Tinubu overcoming their natural aversion to water and paddling across the Kazinga Channel. Scientists that captured the moment described the event and their findings in a paper published in the journal Ecology and Evolution.
At least to me and my team, really the testament of probably the most resilient lion on the continent. I mean, this is an animal that was caught in a snare. He was saved from that snare. A year later, he lost that same leg that was trapped in the snare in a poacher's wheel trap, probably in the Congo. Then 6 months after that, his family was poisoned. His pride was essentially splintered in 2. Shortly thereafter, he was gored by a buffalo. Then he makes a 75-kilometer dispersal up north, trying to find territory with his 2 brothers, loses a brother, and now sort of we see him in the twilight of his life, taking the biggest risks of his life to try and, pass on his genes.
Since they began tracking Jacob in 2017, he's been through a punishing ordeal, mostly at the hand of humans. Lions have been observed swimming before, notably in Zimbabwe and Botswana, but they are far less comfortable in the water than other big cats such as jaguars and tigers.
Oh, what a resilient lion. Jacob has actually seen quite a lot. But that tells you that, if you put your mind to something, you could survive and you could do much, much more better with your life. And that's the start of our package for this week on Africa Update. I hope we've been able to educate you and inspire you. Till I see you same time, same place next week. Do not forget to follow us on our social media platforms and on our YouTube live stream for more news, programs and documentaries. I'm Chamaka Mwafo. Bye for now.